Hello everyone and welcome to April. This is the April edition of the Farmers Supply Association Agriculture Report. I'm Randy Klepechka, agronomist with Farmers Supply Association. Well, April is here, so that means planting season is finally upon us. I say finally, we got here pretty quick compared to, we just seemed like we just got through with harvest not too long ago, but we're in planting right now. It's really been pretty spotty so far. We've got areas that have been wet, areas that have got reasonable amount of time in the field. You talk about the Farmers Supply Association footprint, the northwest part of our footprint, which is where I'm at now, kind of out northwest of Tuckerman. We've had quite a bit of dry weather through this part of the county, up around Swifton and all the way down to Tuckerman, and quite a bit of planting has been done. You get down into the southeast, more part of our footprint down in Cross County, and quite a bit of work's been done down there. But you get in between a lot of eastern Jackson County, Poinsett County, and some areas like that, there's been very limited amount of planting done. So as always, we're at the mercy of the weather, and that's kind of where we're at right now, just kind of spotty planting. We're in really decent shape, I think, for April 14th, which is the day we're taping on, but still we'd like to have more done. We've had rice planted, we've had corn planted, we've had grain sorghum planted, and we've had soybeans planted. You can see right now that we've got a soybean field behind us right now. Nowadays, these planting dates, these planting periods are all just a blur. Used to we'd plant corn, then we'd plant rice, we'd plant beans, but now everything just goes on at once. Kind of makes it hard for suppliers like the co-op and others to supply seed and all that. But we get it done, and the farmers really want to plant everything early if they can. So that's kind of where we're at right now. So what I want to do today is talk about soybeans. There continues to be a lot of interest about high yield soybeans. We've had these yield contests, and these guys, Kip Colors up in Missouri started this maybe 15, 20 years ago. And nowadays it's down in Georgia. Hula and also Dowdy are a couple of the names that we hear a lot about talking about high yield. So, there's farmers' interest because of that. So what I want to do today is talk about some of the things that a lot of these guys that are pushing high yields, specifically in the state of Arkansas, do. And I know I don't want to turn anybody off that's kind of more conservative or whatever, because you can use a lot of these things even if you're just conservative in trying to push high yields. Everybody wants high yields, but some people are willing to go the extra mile, maybe spend some extra money, do some off-the-wall things to try to get them. Others are more conservative trying to get their high yields. So I think some of these things I'm going to talk about really apply to everybody. These are some of the things that the guys that made over 80 bushels in the Go for the Green yield contest in the state of Arkansas did last year to achieve those yields. So again, I'm going to talk about those, maybe give my opinion on some of them. And some of these things, again, are for the high yield guys. Some of them can apply to anybody. I want to start out with field selection for good yields of soybeans. Obviously, number one thing is going to be drainage. Both internal drainage and external drainage is very important, so we got to have that. Of course, you're not going to do anything about the internal, but there's some things you can do about the external to help on that. Land preparation in the fall, and I think that's a key to some of these guys. We're going to talk about planting dates later. You want to plant soybeans earlier, especially if you're pushing those yields. So that ground's got to be ready when springtime gets here, when April gets here. A lot of times you don't have time to prepare in the spring because it's wet. So if that's ready in the fall, then you're ready to go. You can just spray Roundup or some type of burn down and go ahead and plant in April. So I think fall preparation is very important. Also, planting on beds, as you can see behind me. Of course, most people have adopted planting on beds now, and obviously that's going to help on drainage as well. So those are some of the keys on the fields that are best suited for really pushing soybean yields. Varieties. Almost all the varieties that are in these contests, I looked again at the Arkansas yield contest results. Every single variety was an indeterminate Group 4. All but two of those that made more than 80 bushels were in the 4.5 to 4.8 range, so we're in that mid to late range of Group 4s. Two of them were 4.2s, but again, most of them were in that mid to late Group 4 range. Looking at herbicide technologies, 21 of those were Extend varieties. One was a Liberty Link. In fact, the Liberty Link is just about 4 or 5 miles or a few miles south of where we're at right now in the Tuckerman area, and they made 93 bushels with the Liberty Link. And a lot of people think that Liberty Link doesn't have yield potential, but some of them have good yield potential. There was one Roundup Ready 2 variety and one conventional variety. So again, most of them dicamba beans, extend beans. So, but there are some other technologies certainly that can get those yields too. Next, planting date. Again, we said a while ago, early planting. Again, one of the goals of this is early planting is to get canopy closure by summer solstice when we've got those long days of daylight. That way we can intercept that light if we got a good canopy of soybeans out there. So planting early is what we need to do to get this. Looking at, again, the Arkansas results from last year, out of the 24 varieties, 24 fields that made 80 bushels plus in the contest, 13 were planted in April, 9 in May, and 2 in June. So again, most of them pushed towards that April range. And interestingly enough, I looked, there was 2 farmers that made over 100 bushels last year. I looked at those planting dates, and both of those guys planted on the 10th of April. So it looks, so you can see the higher you want to push those yields, it seemed like those earlier planting dates is where you need to be. Seeding rates. And I found this pretty interesting. You know, you'd think that maybe you want to push those seeding rates up a little bit if you're going for these higher yields, but interestingly enough, the average seeding rate among all these was 137,000 seeds per acre. So I normally recommend about 140. So you see, these guys aren't pushing seeding rates any. They found that you don't have to do that. There's some negative things almost about getting too high on your seeding rate. So again, right around that 140 to 150,000 seed per acre range is about where you need to be. Seed treatments. Most people have adopted the use of seed treatments, seem like more than ever. Most of these guys, I think pretty much all of them, have used the insecticide, fungicide seed treatment on their beans. A lot of people are using inoculant to get the rhizobia out there to fix nitrogen to help on that. So a lot of people are using inoculant to help with that. And of course, we've got those rhizobia in the soil if you've been growing beans, but certain situations it may help to have that inoculant, especially when you're getting into those May plantings and later. There's a lot of biological materials out there that guys are using as well. So again, that's not everybody's using those, but a lot of guys I noticed were using those. Fertility is one of the big things. Mainly potash and boron. I think those are the biggies. Most of the guys are using either commercial fertilizer, litter, or a combination of both. And again, they're really trying to get that fertility up there in that high range, especially for potassium. So potassium and boron are the big ones. You can use the Aspire fertilizer like we sell, and that has the potassium and the boron both in the same prill. A very good source. It's proven by university research to be very effective. So again, get those potash levels up there. Make sure you got the boron out there, especially on these rice soils that have the high pH in our area. Other fertility issues, not everybody's using these. It's kind of some people like them, some people think they help, some people don't. Some people don't want to spend the extra money. But additional nitrogen, such as just applying urea or ammonium sulfate to the field during the reproductive stage. The soybean plant, of course, makes its own nitrogen, but once those yields gets above 70 or so, it doesn't really have the ability probably to make as much as it needs or make what it needs to produce over those high yields. So a lot of people supplement with additional nitrogen again at that bloom stage. Some research has shown that to be effective and some otherwise. It's still kind of a mixed bag as far as people's feelings on that. But again, if you're pushing things, that might be a good idea to go ahead and supplement with some nitrogen later in the season. Sulfur is getting to be something talked about quite a bit with high yield soybeans or in soybeans in general. I know I heard a Mississippi fertility guy talk about this at a meeting a couple of winters ago, and he said he thought sulfur was going to be the new potassium. So we'll see if that comes about or not. But some people are supplementing with some type of sulfur, whether it be ammonium sulfate, sulfur plus, which is a product we've got now this year. So again, that's something that you might need to use. Not totally proven yet, but it's something you may want to look at. Again, the nitrogen and the sulfur if you're pushing for high yields. And again, some foliar products, people are using those foliar products as well. To just make sure their bases are covered, especially on micronutrients. A little bit on pest management. Of course, weed control is obviously going to be very important. You got to really rely on residuals. Residuals are very important. You don't ever want weeds to compete with the soybeans. So if you don't really want them to come up, but if they do come up, you got to control them right away. Don't let them compete with the soybeans. So again, residuals can be very useful in this. I don't want your residuals to be too harsh and and maybe affect early season growth. But again, residuals are important, but don't be too harsh with them. Insects. A lot of people are still looking, or still some people using the automatic pyrethroid application like karate or lambda or something like that. I particularly don't like that. You just get rid of beneficial insects when you do that, so I like to avoid that one. But one place I do like to be aggressive with insects, and I see a lot of these guys use these in the yield contest results, that's on your bollworm or your corn earworm control late in the season. That's our #1 insect pest in soybeans. So halogen, the new biological virus that we use to control corn earworm, can be very useful in this situation. Just as soon as you see any small corn earworms out there, go ahead and get that halogen out there, and you should get season-long control, which will really stop any yield loss, obviously, from these corn earworms. If you don't use that, then again, early in, maybe a little bit before threshold gets here, certainly by threshold, look at something like a Prevathon or a Besiege. It's going to give you extended residuals. So I think those are some things we can look at for corn earworm control. Again, I like avoiding the pyrethroids. Fungicides, I think that's very important in producing good yields of soybeans. It prevents, obviously, diseases from occurring, stops them before they get going, just seems to make the plant stay healthier longer. And one thing I learned when I first started getting into this, one of the guys we talked about was Kip Cullors in Missouri, and I made a trip up with a University of Arkansas graduate student several years ago when I was still extension agent. And one of the things that Mr. Cullors did was made sure his beans stayed green a long time. He had to paraquat them or gramoxone them to kill them to harvest them. Otherwise, they just stayed green and stayed green. And that when they stay green that long, they're just continually filling that seed. So the seed size is going to be bigger. It's going to be extended grain field, but the seed size gets bigger. So I think anything we can do to keep that soybean plant green for a longer amount of time is going to extend that grain field period and give you a larger seed, which is going to help contribute to bigger yield. So fungicides can help with this. Most people are going 1, some people go 2, but I think the use of a fungicide can be very important. So these are some of the things, again, that people are doing. I think one of the big keys is timely management. You got to be timely on all these applications. You can't wait, and be 3 or 4 days, a week late on these, or it's going to hurt you. So be timely with your management. Again, try to achieve canopy closure by that summer solstice date, and try to keep them green. For any more information on this, you can contact me through Farmer Supply Association. And this has been Randy Kopechka with your April report.